This is the podcast for broadcast. Sound Off Podcast with Matt Kendall.
Charles Adler is heard on the Global News Radio Network, evenings in Canada, and around the world on the internet. Parts of his show are repurposed for podcast consumption as well. Charles is an old friend from our days working at CJOB in the mid-2000s to 2013. Then Charles left for satellite and resurfaced in 2016 back on terrestrial radio. Now, if you go back into the archives of the Sound Off podcast, you can hear our talk about the early days of his show, both of which have evolved very nicely. Thank you very much. There's lots of politics going on both sides of the border, including the 2020 election in the States and a federal election coming up in Canada. Which brings me to this. My Twitter feed is clogged. My TV is loud, and there's people yelling on it. My head is full. I'm being bombed with fake news. And now, I need some therapy.
Mr. Kundal?
Yeah?
Dr. Adler will see you now.
Thanks. You know, you're approaching, I think it's your third year since you've been back in radio. You were in radio for many years. Then you did some satellite radio, but then you came back to terrestrial radio.
Yeah.
And 3 years later, how do you look back on it and how do you feel about it?
Great. I feel better about radio today than I ever have. And it's not that I don't appreciate podcasts and satellite and all the rest of it. I still pay lots of attention as a consumer. I'm a huge consumer of podcasts, including yours. But just speaking as a professional, getting life satisfaction, professional satisfaction, enjoying being on the air more than ever.
And how do you like the hours? Because you're doing a bit of an evening show. I think people are thinking about going to bed in Toronto and kind of thinking about going to bed in Vancouver. You're starting in the evening hours, but most of your work is now repurposed through the night, and it seems to live on through the day. So how's that as a change?
Well, professionally and personally, it was rather dramatic at the beginning. When you and I first talked, I wasn't even having, sometimes I'd only sleep for a couple of hours. It really played havoc with my body cycle, my biorhythms, whatever you want to call it. It messed me up for a bit. Took me about a year to adjust, and I absolutely love it now. In fact, I love being in the station in the evening. It's a great atmosphere, great time to do radio. I mean, all this business is always about being one-on-one and not sounding like you're talking to millions of people, that kind of stuff. But it's even easier to achieve that one-on-one effect, which you're looking for, that intimacy, when there's almost nobody around you. It's the listener and me. I kind of like it.
Can you compare it to when you were doing 1 to 4 in the afternoon? So when you were working for the Corus Radio Network back in the 2000s, it was primarily an afternoon show. Some people were coming off lunch, and then some people were moving into drive, and there's a busy workday involved. Can you compare the two time slots when you're broadcasting from then to now?
Yeah, you definitely get the impression that people who are listening now in this particular time slot are listening more intently. You get the impression that they crave radio company more in the evening than the afternoon. It's nice to feel needed, Matt.
Was there a time when you didn't feel needed?
No, not really. I can't honestly say that I never felt needed. That's one of the great gifts from broadcasting to the broadcaster. You always do feel needed, but there's something special about the nighttime. As Neil Diamond once said, thank the Lord for the nighttime.
Did you ever work out those sleep patterns in the end? Because you mentioned 3 years ago you were having trouble.
Well, I often get to bed, because it takes a while to unwind. I get home at 11 o'clock, and we're just talking pure local time, real time. So I get home at around 11 o'clock, and it generally takes an hour and a half or 2 hours to unwind, which was always the case no matter what show I was doing and no matter what market, no matter the country. The body and mind are the body and the mind, wherever you are. So it would take me a couple of hours to unwind, and then I would wake up generally 6 hours later. I think I was averaging 6 hours for most of my adult life. Doesn't get to 6 hours now. It gets closer to 4.5 or 5. So what I've got to do is make absolutely sure that I take a nap later in the day.
Charles, I feel a lot better about radio when I see your show in the evening, but Drex, who comes on after you, and I look at Ryan Recker, who does Overnight America down at KMOX, and there are radio companies that are putting people on the air after midnight. Makes you feel good about where radio is going, doesn't it?
Very good. It almost makes you feel like broadcasters are in charge. I think that for the longest time, in many cases, only bean counters would look at the schedule, and all of the bean counters were deciding that you don't have to, after 6 o'clock, after 9 o'clock, pick your poison, pick your number, pick your timeline. But they were always deciding about how certain slots didn't really need to have an expense line attached to them in terms of a human being. You could just automate this or repurpose that. So times are changing. You mentioned 3 particular brands, our friend in St. Louis, and of course my friend Drex here in Vancouver, and yours truly. We're very grateful that broadcasters are making some really good decisions, and they're deciding in favor, because this isn't about us, this is about the consumer, this is about the radio listener, this is about the audiophile. So they're now making judgments. Broadcasters are making good managerial judgments that are favoring the radio consumer. And how can I not love that? I mean, yes, I'm a radio broadcaster, and I have been for over 40 years. But I started out in life as a radio consumer, and I still relate to it from that perspective. I relate to it as a person who loves radio, who needs radio, and wants radio to be live 24/7. That's the magic of radio, always was. My radio companion never leaves me. And I would encourage any broadcaster involved in leadership right now, no matter what the company or country, to understand that the most important part of the magic is that radio is always, always there.
Do you have a particular way you listen to the radio at home? Do you stream it? Do you have one of those smart speakers? Do you have, is there any other way you consume it?
No, I stream it. It's the computer. It's the computer. It's the phone. I don't actually have radio appliances.
And in the car, you just listen terrestrially, of course.
Yeah, I listen to terrestrial. I listen to satellite. I listen to, whatever I can listen to. Sometimes somebody passes on a CD that they want me to listen to, and I'll listen to that. So, the audio entertainment is diverse, but my mind is always going to be a tourist of the various platforms, but I still see terrestrial as my natural home.
Do you have a favorite social media platform? Because I get it.
I'm on Facebook, but very rarely. I don't seem to get the buzz on Facebook that I get on Twitter. I just feel on Twitter, it's like radio. It's there right now, and I love living in the right now. I know that some of my fellow broadcasters really enjoy nostalgia, and I can take nostalgia in small doses. When I look at Facebook, I don't get that same sense of now. It feels like people talking about what happened 6 hours ago or 6 years ago. And with Twitter, it's immediate. So yeah, I'm a Twitter file, if you will.
Do you have the Twitter on while you're broadcasting? Do you keep an eye on it, or will you actively tweet while you're on the air?
I don't tweet very much when I'm on the air, a little bit, but it's always there. It's always out of the corner of my eye. I mean, for many, many years, and this is still the case, I've always got a TV on, right, for live breaking events that might break on TV before they break anywhere else. I feel I always have that need to have TV out of the corner of my eye. That became particularly acute during 9/11. I think that's when I got into the habit of always making sure there's at least one TV monitor. And now I've got Twitter as well. So the TV and Twitter are never far from the right eyeball.
Do you even bother putting on CNN and Fox News and watching the Hollywood squares of political debate every day and people yelling at each other? And I mean, is that even useful prep for you?
No, I never watch it during the prep. There's a show that I watch when I'm unwinding at night, and people might find it a little odd that you would unwind with a news show, but there is one that I really, really like, and that's Brian Williams on MSNBC. So I tape that at 11 o'clock Eastern, and I get home at 11 o'clock Pacific, and I turn that on.
What do you think the role is for these two networks, and even the Canadian ones at that, going forward, the way they do their programming? A lot of it seems very useless.
The people shouting at each other, like people who are are there representing the different political parties, or in the States representing Trump and anti-Trump and all of that. I don't know. There's still obviously an audience for it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. I can't get into it. It feels, to use Donald Trump's favorite word, it feels fake. It feels contrived. I know ahead of time exactly what's going to be said by whom. And it's always about this one subject, Trump. All the planets revolve around Trump. Trump is the sun. And the idea of Trump being the sun and all of the planets being interested in nothing but Trump, it doesn't give me any sustenance, any encouragement. I find it to be overall a downer. I mean, I just think of all programming that way, whether it's film, audio, you name it. If I'm not left inspired, if I'm not left after the program curious, alive, vital, I just see it as a waste of time. And in the end, time is the only commodity that we can ever get back. So the idea of surrendering or sacrificing my time for Donald Trump is ridiculous.
Well, I was going to ask you if you had a Donald Trump policy. So do you stay away, or do you venture into Donald Trump subject matter when you feel you need to? I mean, is there anything that can come out of it after you start the discussion on the radio?
I rarely discuss it on the radio. Sometimes in the crossover I do with Drex every night, just before 10 o'clock Pacific, just before 1 a.m. Eastern. We'll allude to it from time to time. I don't know if Drex spends much more time on it. I think he spends a little more time because Drex is always looking for crazy audio and having people react to crazy audio. And so, Trump naturally is the great gift for that kind of thing. But I try to limit my Trump consumption. I consume, I'd say, 90% less of Trump today than I did when he first came to power.
Do you want to make a fearless prediction for like a year from now?
Yeah, I don't think this one is difficult. I think Trump will lose, and I think he'll lose big. He may even lose Texas.
Wow.
The thing is that people take this one seriously. And people like Trump can only win when the overwhelming majority of people are apathetic.
In just a second, we're going to talk politics north of the border. I need a little therapy, by the way, Charles. So I'm coming to you for a little bit of therapy about some of the things that are happening in and around me. And I'm going to ask you to talk me through some of this stuff because I see it and I don't understand it. And so I'm just going to ask for the perspective from you. So when I look at where Canada is, we're going into an election. It seems that the Conservatives should be winning by a lot more, yet they're not. Why is that?
Yeah, I may look at it a little differently. I'm still one of these people who's hung up on economics because I still feel that if people are feeling relatively comfortable, economically, relatively comfortable, they tend to vote for the status quo. And I don't see at the moment, even though affordability is a huge issue, so maybe the word comfortable isn't the appropriate word, but people have jobs for the most part. That's the most important. And people feel that they will continue to have jobs. Politically, that's absolutely critical. Unless between now and October 21st, people develop a sense that they're about to lose their jobs, it's very unlikely to me that they would say no to the incumbent, no matter who they are, and albeit scandals like SNC Lavalin and all those of us in media pay a lot of attention to. So it may feel bland for some junkies to hear this, but when people don't feel job loss is imminent, when people don't feel the loss of their home is imminent, they're much less likely to vote for change. So I think the odds favor Trudeau. I think that Trudeau will likely get a majority.
Did the Conservatives hire the wrong guy?
Absolutely. I think the Conservatives have been accused of being arrogant, so have the Liberals. conservative partisans will always say the Liberals are the most arrogant, and Liberals will say the same about the Conservatives, and both will feel that they're standing on the truth. So that's partisanship. But when you get away from the partisanship and you just ask your question, ask the basic question, who is the best possible salesman for their particular party? It's hard not to see Trudeau being the better salesman for liberalism. Andrew Scheer's pitch on conservatism is, we'll put more money in your pocket. Man, that is ancient. I mean, we've been hearing governments promising to put more money in our pocket forever. When I hear those words, I'm hearing a door-to-door salesman. And all I'm looking to is my Canadian values to politely wait for him to sort of finish a sentence so I can simply say, thank you, sir. Have a good day.
Looking back in the rearview mirror, the Conservatives did have an option. They could have gone with, let's see, who was number 2 on the list? Oh, Maxime Bernier. Because that would have been a wild improvement.
Well, the thing is, Matt, I mean, that the choices there told you everything about where the Conservatives honestly felt they were. The leaders of the Conservative movement at the time, I mean, you can talk about the Jason Kennys, the Peter MacKays, the sort of the blue chip, tried and true. Well, think about another person from the Harper era. Think about John Baird. I mean, none of these people wanted to participate in that process for a simple reason. None of them wanted to run for opposition leader, and none of them wanted to be opposition leader for another 6 or 7 years, because none of them thought that unless the economy cratered, that Trudeau would be defeated. And I think all of them were right. I don't think Trudeau is going to crater before getting a second term, and none of them wanted to be long-term opposition leaders, not to mention the fact that they were very well aware that if they lost the next election, which is now this election, the knives would be out for them, because that's how political parties operate. They put you in there and they say all kinds of nice things about you, especially after you've been elected the leader, and they'll say all sorts of nice things about you during the campaign. But the moment the campaign is over, if you're not the winner on the scoreboard, they find all sorts of reasons to say, well, I always thought there were some issues here. I was never sold 100% on this person. And I guess now it's time for us to reflect on where we're at and to redefine conservatism in this case, and to figure out what we need to do to go forward with leadership, which are all weasel words to say, we had a feeling we picked the wrong guy. Turns out we did.
Yeah, and you mentioned all those names, including John Baird. I would also add Rona Ambrose to that list of qualified candidates. The Conservative Party of today certainly doesn't feel like the Conservative Party of Joe Clark. With a mix of red Tories from out east, it really feels like it's gone off the rails and gone sideways. And it almost feels like it's peaked at 34%.
Yeah, I mean, I've always had a problem with this era of conservatism, because I've made no secret about it. I'm a progressive conservative. And when you take not just the word, but the vibe and the affection for progress, for social progress, when you take that away from the conservative brand, for me, it's an alien. It's something that I don't know. As a matter of fact, when I was growing up in Montreal, I was growing up in Pierre Trudeau's riding. Pierre Trudeau's the first person I ever voted for. He was literally on the ballot where I was living. I was just a kid. I was 19. It was my first election. And at the time, to the extent that I knew anything about conservatism, and I never actually met a conservative before I was 19 years old. I didn't meet conservatives until I moved out of Quebec. So the Conservative Party was a non-factor until Brian Mulroney became head of the Conservatives. But I thought at the time that the reason the Conservatives don't win very often is because the Conservatives, unlike the Liberals, want to spend way too much time with your personal issues, want to deprive you of personal freedom. And I saw liberalism as giving people the maximum amount of personal freedom with, a strong central government. That's what I bought into. And I guess that's still where I'm at. And when the Conservative Party under Mulroney and some others, you mentioned Joe Clark, but when I I think about where I developed an affection for progressive conservatism. It was when I moved from Quebec to Ontario, and Bill Davis was the premier. I was crazy about Bill Davis. I still am. I think he's the best Canadian retail politician who I've ever met. He's one of the few that I trust 100%. I trust his instincts. So that's to say that even when he makes a decision that I don't agree with, I don't think he's doing it out of malice. I don't think he's doing it because he's corrupt. I respect Uncle Bill, and as I say, I always will. So Bill Davis is my model of progressive conservatism. There are no Bill Davises these days who are highly involved with the Conservative Party of Canada. And if they are, they're doing a really good job of hiding it.
I'd love to say that the Conservatives were the only party taking on water, but it looks like the NDP are taking on even more water.
The NDP for several years now have been drifting away from being the party of the working person, the blue-collar party. They've become the party of academics. And so some years academics are vitally interested in what that party is about. Now, not so much. Many of the academics have drifted over to the Green Party, and that seems to be, at least philosophically, more interesting for them.
And I was going to mention the Green Party. You've got some people who traditionally voted Conservative taking a look at the Green Party, and probably the same thing for those who want to vote NDP. And now you've got a bit of a wave forming with the Green Party, especially out in the Maritimes. It seems to start there. But a lot of people are considering this.
Yeah, and a lot of people on the progressive side are considering the Green Party because, hey, who doesn't love the environment, and who doesn't love someone who makes a pitch for protecting and defending our precious environment? And you get a strong sense of that here in British Columbia. But the thing is that we've heard this before, when, before the writ is dropped, even after the writ is dropped, there are people who look at all their various options because they're not crazy about the two major brands. The two major brands have always been Liberal and Conservative. They sort of mentally give some time to the options. But then when it comes down to actually voting, they tend to have that binary, either or look at it. And very often they simply ask themselves, okay, so which rascals don't I want near authority? Which ones do I want in the penalty box or sitting on the sidelines? And that's how many people tend to vote. So come October 21st, if people feel that the guys they dislike the most are the Conservatives, they'll vote Liberal, I think, not Green or NDP for the most part. They'll vote Liberal, and vice versa for those people who really, really want to make sure that Trudeau does not return for another 4 years. They'll be highly motivated to vote Conservative, not Green or NDP.
Which Twitter personality represents the crazy old aunt that you once had? Is it Sheila Copps or Kim Campbell?
Actually, I enjoy reading both Sheila and Kim. They're two of my favorite people to follow on Twitter.
I know, it's funny. Sheila used to make me mad, and Kim I thought was interesting. And now it's kind of like when I watch them do their Twitter thing, I'm like, I wish they would come back. Get more involved.
Well, look, I enjoy politics with personality, and whether it's Liberals, Conservatives, or any of them. So much of it is sanitized. I mean, I don't vote Green, but I love Elizabeth May. I confess, I love chatting with her because I'm talking to a real human being who's got a lot of passion. She loves talking about politics. She doesn't do talking points at all. I don't think those words talking points mean anything to her. And so I enjoy talking to her. Now, do I vote for Elizabeth May? No. But she's a personality, and I'd love to see more personalities in all the parties. I mean, if you ask the average person, so name the most interesting people in politics today among the four major parties. Like, who is actually interesting? Never mind why you vote the way you do. Who is actually interesting? Very few names come up.
Catherine McKenna will come up, but that's just because I love the reactions. Whenever she posts something, all the nut jobs come out to respond. And I think the responses can be alarming.
Well, you talk about the nut jobs. I mean, it doesn't matter what era you're in. The nut jobs have always been into conspiracies, but conspiracies today and conspiracist thinking, especially on places like Twitter, and of course now you've got all these different cable networks and different networks online. Conspiracist thinking is getting much more attention now than it ever has. But, as I was growing up, conspiracists were always seen as people who were just missing something. They were emotionally involved in something, and the facts didn't matter.
Okay, wait for it. We're going to talk Uber. We're going to talk about podcast, and we'll talk about the Montreal Expos in just a second. There are two subjects that you've had me on the air on your show to talk about, and they are still, still boiling, especially in Vancouver. How easy is it to get a cab in Vancouver these days?
Well, the craziest thing is that really late at night when the clubs let out around 1 o'clock in the morning, it's incredibly difficult to get a cab. That makes no sense, not just from, a business model point of view, servicing the customer, but even in terms of safety. I mean, many people, especially young people, are going to clubs, always have, always will. And 1 o'clock in the morning is when they are desperately in need of a cab. So, I mean, many of them, just from a practical perspective, will get out of the club earlier. And of course, that's less business for the club to make sure that they can have a good shot at getting a cab. And the other time that you absolutely want to have a cab is when you come in late night from some other country and you're at the airport at, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And it's just crazy to be arriving early in the morning or very late at night in a major city like Vancouver and having problems getting a cab. It's just, it's the weird. It's the only thing about Vancouver that I find to be annoying. It's very, very easy to live in this part of the world. The cab thing is a different story.
I always say that when you get off the airplane and your Uber app or your Lyft app doesn't work, it sends a message immediately about the kind of city you live in, and it doesn't feel progressive. And I know it's Uber, and I know it's Lyft, and I know that those aren't perfect companies, and they don't always play ball civically. But what can you do to make it happen? And I don't think our civic officials, and I speak for Winnipeg as well, because we don't have that here. We've got something else. But I don't feel they make the effort to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are small towns in this country who feel that, hey, we're no longer a small town if Tim Hortons opens a store. It's an event in any town in Canada if Tim Hortons comes to town. The idea that Uber isn't in places like Vancouver and Winnipeg, that's just weird, and not weird in a good way. Now, Uber supposedly is going to be in Vancouver before Christmas, and there are all kinds of restrictions, all sorts of rules that are being put in place by the provincial government and the various regulatory authorities. But we're told that Uber will be here. We'll wait and see to see how effective Uber is here. They'll be relatively restricted to Metro Vancouver. I believe they'll be in all of Metro Vancouver, but one is agnostic and skeptical until one sees it. I can tell you that, as someone who loves going to Vegas and using Uber, it's just incredible. I mean, my problem with Uber is just an intellectual one. Uber doesn't make any money. Uber has never made any money. So I'm always wondering whether or not it'll simply die for the oldest reason in business. We're not making any money. It's been still fetching a lot of money on the stock market, and that's incredibly interesting. You look at all the shares, you add up the shares, there's lots of money there. But every month, the balance sheet comes in redder and redder and redder. So we'll see how that works out.
Yeah, I guess that's always been the fear, that a city pushes all in on Uber and then all of a sudden it's not there one day and you've wasted a lot of time and money on it. So I can certainly understand the trepidation on going in on that. The Montreal Expos look like they're going to be coming back in some strange form, possibly, and you and I talked about this, and I used the term sister wives, where they're going to be spending some time in Montreal when it works and spending some time in Tampa Bay when it works. Sister wives.
That's crazy. I mean, Matt, I don't care which sport you're talking about. You have to have a home. You can't just be wandering. I mean, if you're a team like the Harlem Globetrotters, that's different. That's just an entertainment vehicle. It's no different than a rock band going from town to town. But a baseball team is not a rock band. A baseball team, that's your neighbor. And why is my neighbor in Tampa calling Tampa home? Make up your mind.
You just mentioned Vegas. The Raiders are going to Vegas. There's another team that feels like it can just sort of get up and go anywhere. I don't.
They move around, but that brand, the Raiders, it's still a big brand, and they have fans all over the world, and they will do great in Vegas. The easiest prediction I could ever make: the Raiders will own Vegas.
Well, it's going to be 8 show nights, 8 wonderful show nights down in Vegas. Would you make that a stop on your trip to Vegas?
Absolutely. Watching hockey, watching, Celine Dion, Shania Twain, the Raiders. I mean, any event in Vegas is larger. There's something about Vegas. There's something about what they know to do with audio and visuals and marketing and comfort and customer service. So much of entertainment is customer service. Vegas knows how to serve. I don't mean to sound like the president of the Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce. I'm not getting any money for saying this. But when I want a guaranteed fun fix, Vegas to me is Disneyland.
Charles, I know you're a consumer of podcasts, and Corus has one that just came out last June. Wait, There's More with Tamara Kondaker. What other ones do you listen to?
Well, I listen to Matt Kundle. Yeah, sure. So I listen to yours because you're the doctor of podcasting. You're kind of our life coach. But aside from what you're doing with your life and all of these great podcasters and broadcasters and letting us know where the industry is, I love listening to The Daily. I love listening to the Washington Post version of The Daily. That's how I kind of look at it. So the 2 great papers in the States, the New York Times and the Washington Post. I do like the Wall Street Journal, but I'm not really crazy about their podcasts. There's a conservative podcast, a Never Trump conservative podcast. So it's not a podcast that's stroking Trump. It's quite the opposite. And fabulous talk show host who for years and years was the king of the Midwest, Charlie Sykes out of Milwaukee. And these days his podcasts are out of both Milwaukee and Washington. So Charlie Sykes has a podcast called The Bulwark, Bullwark, The Bulwark. And he's got tremendous guests on that, great dialogue. I listen to that. I love listening to the person who technically is my boss. I just see him as a great friend, Larry Gifford, who I'm sure you've interviewed more than once because I've heard him at least once on your podcast. Larry Gifford has When Life Gives You Parkinson's. And yes, technically it's about Parkinson's because that's what Larry has and that's what Larry shares in common with many of his guests. But it's not about Parkinson's. It's about life. And Larry's insights on life, whether I'm getting them in real time, one-on-one in his office or a boardroom or a studio or listening to his podcasts, are must-listens for anyone who cares about not Parkinson's, but about life. But what he's doing for people with Parkinson's is outstanding.
The second season of that podcast just launched, and I hope people are not writing down all those podcasts that you just mentioned, because I'm going to put them in the show notes of this episode, and people can connect to them. Oh, and Charles, you can send me the therapy bill for $150, by the way.
I love talking to Matt. Matt Kundle, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Sound Off Podcast. Find us online at soundoffpodcast.com and connect with us wherever great social media is housed. The show is imaged using the sounds from Core Image Studios.
Written and hosted by Matt Kundle.
A production of the Sound Off Media Company.